From a dimension frozen in time to a Russian base built under everyone's noses. In this video, we're breaking down the 5 most glaring plot holes in Stranger Things that have left fans scratching their heads since the show premiered. These aren't just minor continuity errors, these are massive gaps in logic that make you wonder how nobody at Netflix caught them before hitting upload. First up, the Upside Down is stuck in 1983, not 1979. The Upside Down being frozen on November 6, 1983, instead of 1979, creates a timeline paradox that the show still hasn't explained. In Season 4, Episode 7, titled The Massacre at Hawkins' Lab, Nancy Wheeler travels through the Watergate at Lover's Lake into the Upside Down. The group goes to Nancy's house to retrieve her hidden guns. Nancy discovers the guns aren't there. She finds her old diary and realizes the last entry was November 6, 1983, the day Will Byers went missing. Nancy confirms out loud that the Upside Down is stuck in the past, frozen on that exact date. The discovery happens when she sees old wallpaper, study cards from sophomore year, and toys she threw away years earlier, all still present in the Upside Down version of her room. This creates a major problem, because Henry Creel, later known as Vecna, was banished to the Upside Down in September 1979, 4 years before November 1983. When Eleven overpowered one in the Rainbow Room during the Hawkins Lab massacre, she sent him through a crack in the wall into what appeared to be a volcanic desert landscape. That was 1979. The gate Eleven opened on November 6, 1983, when she made contact with the Demogorgon, was a completely different event. According to the show's established timeline, the Upside Down should be frozen on September 8, 1979, when Vecna first arrived there, not 4 years later.
The Duffer Brothers confirmed in interviews with Deadline and Variety that this is intentional and will be addressed in Season 5. Ross Duffer stated, the biggest one being, we set up in the Volume 1 finale how the Upside Down is stuck in time on the day of Will's disappearance. That's something we don't answer in Volume 2, and that is really the key plot point, the key question that is going to drive our final season. This timeline makes zero sense with what the show already established. Vecna spent 4 years in the Upside Down before November 1983. He told Nancy he's been busy, so very busy, during those years. The show confirmed through flashbacks that when Vecna first arrived in 1979, the Upside Down looked like a barren volcanic wasteland with floating rocks and red lightning. By 1983, it was a perfect mirror of Hawkins, covered in vines and spores. Something happened during those 4 years to transform the Upside Down from a desert hellscape into a copy of Hawkins. The logical explanation would be Vecna built it, similar to how a spider builds a web to catch prey. But that doesn't explain why time froze specifically on November 6, 1983. If the Upside Down was already copying Hawkins before that date, why would Eleven opening the gate freeze time? The show wants us to believe Will's disappearance on November 6, 1983 somehow locked the Upside Down in temporal stasis. Except Will didn't create the gate. Eleven did. Will was just the first victim taken through it. The Duffer Brothers admitted they're saving the explanation for Season 5, which means they wrote themselves into a corner and need the final season to dig out. Fans have theorized everything from Eleven's psychic power freezing time to Will potentially having hidden abilities that stopped the clock. None of it changes the fact that the show spent 3 seasons treating the Upside Down like a parallel dimension running in real time, then suddenly revealed it's been frozen for years. That's not clever foreshadowing, that's a retcon. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this breakdown, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The Upside Down timeline is confusing, but wait until you hear about the construction project nobody noticed. The Russians built a massive underground base in 1 year. The Soviet Union somehow constructed a gigantic underground military facility beneath Starcourt Mall in less than a year without anyone in Hawkins noticing. Season 3 reveals that starting in late 1984, a company called Starcourt Industries began purchasing land in Hawkins. On December 3, 1984, they acquired 6 acres adjacent to Jordan Lake. Construction on Starcourt Mall began shortly after. By summer 1985, the mall opened for business with dozens of stores, a movie theater, and a food court. Underneath the mall, the Russians had built an enormous underground base, complete with laboratories, holding cells, a massive laser array called the Key to open gates to the Upside Down, and tunnels connecting to other locations around Hawkins. The base required significant excavation, far deeper than a normal mall foundation. Steve, Robin, Dustin, and Erica discovered the base when they rode an elevator that descended for several minutes underground. The facility was staffed by Russian scientists and armed Soviet soldiers. Mayor Larry Klein accepted bribes to facilitate the construction and look the other way. Russian agents, disguised as Lynx transportation workers, delivered radioactive materials to the base through the mall's shipping docks. The Duffer Brothers' own timeline confirms construction started in late 1984 and finished by July 1985, a span of roughly 7 to 8 months. Building a shopping mall takes years under normal circumstances. Building a shopping mall as a cover for a secret underground Soviet military installation should take even longer. The logistics alone are impossible.
Russian scientists would need to excavate thousands of tons of earth without anyone noticing.
They need to pour massive amounts of concrete for the underground structure. They'd need to install sophisticated equipment, including the key laser array and power systems capable of tearing holes in reality. All of this happened in a small Indiana town during the height of Cold War tensions. Nobody at Hawkins National Laboratory noticed, despite having monitoring equipment throughout the area. The U.S. military didn't detect foreign nationals building a base on American soil. Local construction workers apparently never questioned why a mall required excavation deep enough to need elevators that descend for minutes. The show handwaves this by saying Mayor Klein was corrupt and took bribes. One crooked mayor doesn't explain how dozens of Soviet soldiers and scientists entered the United States, traveled to Hawkins, and operated undetected for months. The mall's construction should have involved local contractors, building inspectors, utility companies, and zoning boards. Someone would have noticed that the project required far more excavation than a shopping center needs. Reddit users pointed out that even with Klein's help, the timeline is physically impossible. Major construction projects in 1985 required permits, environmental surveys, and inspections. The Russians would need to coordinate multiple fake companies, forge documents, bribe numerous officials, and somehow prevent every single worker from talking. The show expects us to believe this all happened silently, while Joyce buyers worked at the general store and kids rode bikes past the construction site. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me which Stranger Things plot hole bothers you the most. While the Russians were digging holes, the show was digging itself into another problem with Eleven's abilities. Eleven could speak in 1979, but not in 1983. Eleven spoke in complete sentences during the 1979 Hawkins Lab flashbacks, despite barely being able to talk when she escaped the lab in 1983. In Season 1, when Eleven escapes from Hawkins Lab on November 6, 1983, she can barely speak. Her vocabulary consists of basic words like no, bad, papa, and friends don't lie. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas have to teach her how to communicate. She points at pictures in books because she doesn't know the words for things. Her speech is broken and limited throughout the entire first season. In Season 4, extensive flashbacks show Eleven at Hawkins Lab in 1979, when she was around 8 or 9 years old. During these flashbacks, Eleven speaks in full sentences. She has conversations with other children in the Rainbow Room. She talks with orderly Peter Ballard, who's actually Henry Creel. Young Eleven demonstrates verbal skills far beyond what she displayed 4 years later in Season 1. She understands complex instructions, responds to questions with complete thoughts, and communicates clearly with Dr. Brenner. The massacre at Hawkins Lab occurred in September 1979. After Eleven sent one through the gate to the Upside Down, she fell into a coma. When she woke up, Brenner isolated her completely. According to the Duffer Brothers' interviews with TV Line and Variety, Eleven was kept alone in a cell with no interaction except occasional visits from Dr. Brenner. This isolation lasted from 1979 until her escape in 1983. The Duffer Brothers addressed this directly in interviews, claiming it's not a plot hole, but a planned story element. Ross Duffer explained, "She's socialized, then she goes into a coma for a period of time, reawakens, and then is isolated completely by Dr. Brenner." Matt Duffer added, "When you meet her, she's 9, right? And then she blacks out. She doesn't have a memory of all this. The Season 1 flashbacks that take place post-massacre, she's locked up in a cell, just by herself with no other children." The problem is, this explanation was added after fans called out the inconsistency. If the writers planned this from the beginning, they should have shown it in Season 4, rather than explaining it in press interviews. The show depicts young Eleven speaking clearly in 1979, then cuts to 1983, where she can barely form sentences.
That's a 4-year gap, where supposedly trauma and isolation destroyed her verbal abilities. Children can regress from trauma, but 11's regression is severe enough that she forgot how to construct basic sentences. She couldn't ask for food. She didn't know what pretty meant when Nancy called her that. A child who spoke fluently at 9 wouldn't completely lose language comprehension by 13 unless something catastrophic happened to her brain. The coma and isolation explanation feels tacked on because the show never depicts it. We see flashbacks to 11 in the isolation cell during season 1, but those scenes don't show her speaking clearly, then slowly losing abilities. She's already nonverbal in those flashbacks. The Duffers want credit for planning this all along, but if it was planned, it was poorly executed. 11's speech problems are confusing, but Will's survival is straight up impossible. Will survived a week in the Upside Down with no food or water. Will Byers spent nearly 7 days trapped in the Upside Down, despite being a 12-year-old boy with no survival training, no food, no water, and toxic air. On November 6, 1983, Will Byers was riding his bike home from a Dungeons & Dragons session at Mike Wheeler's house. The Demogorgon stalked him on Mirkwood Road and chased him to his house. Will ran to the backyard shed and grabbed a hunting rifle. He fired at the creature, but was still taken into the Upside Down.
Will remained trapped there until November 12, 1983, when Joyce Byers and Jim Hopper found him in the public library's basement. That's 6 full days in an alternate dimension. During that time, Will had no access to food or clean water. The Stranger Things comic series, published by Dark Horse Comics, shows Will hiding in the upside-down version of Castle Byers and trying to evade the Demogorgon. He attempted to help Barbara Holland, but was too late. He saved Nancy Wheeler when she briefly entered the Upside Down. According to the comics, Will grew progressively weaker as days passed. The show established in Season 1 that the Upside Down's atmosphere is toxic. Scientists at Hawkins' lab stated that prolonged exposure to the Upside Down's air is dangerous and potentially lethal to humans. Despite this, Will survived alone for nearly a week. When Joyce and Hopper found him, he was barely alive, with a vine extending down his throat. Hopper removed the vine and performed CPR to resuscitate him. Will was sick afterward and spent time in the hospital, but he survived. Will's survival defies basic biology. Humans can survive roughly 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food under ideal conditions. The Upside Down is not ideal conditions. The air is toxic. The environment is cold, dark, and covered in spores. Will was 12 years old, terrified, and being hunted by an interdimensional monster. Any medical professional would tell you a child in those circumstances wouldn't last 48 hours, let alone a full week. The show wants us to believe Will's determination and hiding skills kept him alive. The comics show him drinking from contaminated sources and barely staying ahead of the Demogorgon. That doesn't explain the toxic air problem or the lack of nutrition. Barbara Holland died within hours of being taken to the Upside Down. Other victims didn't survive at all. Will somehow lasted 7 times longer than Barb, despite being younger and smaller. Fans have theorized that Vecna intentionally kept Will alive for unknown reasons. Season 4 revealed that Vecna controls everything in the Upside Down through the hive mind. He knew Will was there. The theory suggests Vecna wanted Will to survive, possibly because Will had some connection or ability Vecna planned to exploit. This theory makes sense, with Season 5 reportedly focusing on Will's importance to the overall story. The problem is the show never states this. It's fan speculation trying to patch a hole in the writing. If Vecna kept Will alive, the show should have shown it, or at least hinted at it beyond Will's lingering connection to the Upside Down. As presented, Will surviving a week in that environment is medically impossible. The show needed him alive for the story, so they ignored the logistics of how that would actually work. And finally, speaking of Will, the show forgot something important about him. The show forgot Will's birthday. Stranger Things established Will Byers' birthday as March 22nd in Season 2, then completely ignored that date in Season 4, when the calendar showed March 22nd. In Season 2, Episode 2, titled Trick or Treat Freak, Joyce Byers tells Bob Newby at the arcade that Will's birthday is March 22nd. This is stated explicitly in dialogue. In Season 4, Episode 2, titled Vecna's Curse, a video recording Elle sends to Mike is dated March 22nd, 1986. Mike visits Eleven and Will at their home in California on this date. The entire episode takes place on March 22nd, 1986.
according to the timestamp shown on screen. Nobody mentions Will's birthday. Not Joyce, not Jonathan, not Mike, who is Will's best friend, not Eleven, who lives in the same house. Will acts moody throughout the episode because he feels like a third wheel around Mike and Eleven, not because everyone forgot his birthday. The Duffer Brothers admitted in interviews that they forgot it was Will's birthday when writing the episode.
This is a confirmed error, not a deliberate creative choice. Ross Duffer acknowledged the mistake, though he didn't elaborate on how it happened during the writing and filming process. This is the most inexcusable plot hole on the list because the creators themselves admitted it was a mistake. Someone on the writing staff set the date as March 22. Someone approved the timestamp in the video. Someone wrote the episode where Will feels ignored and isolated. At no point during writing, filming, editing, or post-production did anyone notice that they'd scheduled the California storyline on Will's established birthday. The show spent 4 seasons building up Will as the kid who can't catch a break. He was trapped in the Upside Down. He was possessed by the Mind Flayer. He struggled with his identity and feelings for Mike. Season 4 positions Will as this tragic figure who feels left behind while his friends move on with their lives. The forgotten birthday would have been perfect to reinforce that theme. Will sitting alone on his birthday, while Mike and Elle are wrapped up in each other, would have added emotional weight to his isolation. Instead, the show accidentally stumbled into the perfect metaphor for Will's arc and didn't even realize it. Fans initially thought it was intentional. Some believed the forgotten birthday was meant to show how disconnected Will felt from his family and friends. Then, the Duffers confirmed it was just an error. That's worse than if it never happened at all. A deliberate choice to ignore Will's birthday would at least serve the story. An accidental oversight is just sloppy. This is a show with a massive budget, a huge fan base, and years between seasons to catch these mistakes. The fact that nobody noticed during the entire production process reveals a fundamental lack of attention to their own continuity. These plot holes show that even the best shows make mistakes. Stranger Things is one of the biggest shows in Netflix history. The Duffer Brothers created a cultural phenomenon that blends 80s nostalgia with sci-fi horror. The performances are incredible, the creature designs are terrifying, and the emotional beats hit hard. But popularity doesn't make a show immune to criticism. The Upside Down's frozen timeline creates a paradox the show still hasn't explained. Vecna arrived in 1979, but the dimension didn't freeze until 1983. The Duffers promise answers in Season 5, but that's a retcon dressed up as mystery. They wrote themselves into a corner by not establishing the rules earlier. The Russian base under Starcourt Mall is physically impossible. Even with a corrupt mayor, you can't build an underground military facility in 7 months without anyone noticing. The show expects us to accept that Soviet soldiers operated in Indiana while the US government somehow missed it. That's not suspension of disbelief. That's asking us to ignore common sense. Eleven's speech regression has an explanation, according to the Duffers, but that explanation only exists in interviews, not on screen. They claim trauma and isolation destroyed her verbal abilities between 1979 and 1983. If that was always the plan, they should have shown it. Explaining plot holes in press junkets doesn't count as good storytelling. Will's week-long survival in the Upside Down defies biology. A 12-year-old can't live 7 days without food or water in a toxic environment while being hunted by monsters. The show needed Will alive for the plot, so they ignored the logistics. Fan theories about Vecna keeping Will alive might be true, but the show never confirms it. Will's forgotten birthday is the most embarrassing because it's a confirmed mistake. The Duffers admitted they forgot. That's not a nitpick. That's a failure of basic continuity on a show that had years to get it right. These aren't small errors. These are fundamental problems with how the show handles its own mythology. The Upside Down's rules changes between seasons. The Russian storyline ignored real-world logistics. Character abilities and timelines shifted when convenient for the plot. What makes these plot holes frustrating is that Stranger Things doesn't need them. The show works best when it focuses on character relationships and emotional stakes. The supernatural elements should enhance those stories, not create confusion. When the mythology becomes more important than the characters, the cracks start showing. Season 5 has the enormous task of wrapping up everything the show built over 8 years. The Duffers need to explain the Upside Down's timeline. They need to justify Will's survival and importance to the story. They need to stick the landing on character arcs
like Will's identity journey and Eleven's purpose beyond just being a weapon. The biggest test for Season 5 won't be defeating Vecna. It'll be whether the Duffers can answer their own questions without creating more plot holes. They've promised that Season 5 focuses on the Upside Down itself and Will's central role in everything. If they pull it off, these earlier plot holes might feel like intentional setup. If they don't, Stranger Things will be remembered as a show that started strong but couldn't maintain its own internal logic. Plot holes don't ruin a show automatically. Every long-running series has them. What matters is whether the emotional core stays intact. Stranger Things' heart has always been the friendships between kids fighting impossible odds. As long as Season 5 delivers on those relationships, fans will probably forgive the messy mythology. But that doesn't mean we should pretend these problems don't exist. Pointing out plot holes isn't about tearing down something popular. It's about holding storytellers accountable for the worlds they create.
The Duffers built an incredibly detailed universe with Stranger Things. When that universe contradicts itself, it's worth examining why. The show trained us to pay attention to details, Easter eggs, foreshadowing, hidden connections. Fans spent years analyzing every frame for clues. Then, when we notice inconsistencies using those same analytical skills, we're told to just enjoy the ride. That's not how it works. If you want credit for meticulous world building, you have to accept criticism when the building has structural problems. Stranger Things Season 5 will determine whether these plot holes were always part of a bigger plan, or if the Duffers were making it up as they went. Either way, the show remains a defining piece of modern television. These problems don't erase the incredible moments, the perfect soundtrack choices, or the performances that made us care about these characters. They just prove that even the best shows aren't perfect. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Stranger Things' biggest plot holes, make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on, and I'll see you in the next video about unexplained moments in the show.